Okay, and our speaker tonight is Pete Cannell from Edinburgh Stop the War. He's going to talk about No Glory in War, the military and independence.
Okay, thanks for the invite to talk. I suppose what I want to do is maybe try and kick off a discussion about really the relationship between kind of war, peace, and the next 12 months or so in the run-up to the independence debate. And it's maybe quite timely because some of the SNP's proposals in the white paper have just come out, and there is bits on that which I'll come back to on future attitudes to Trident, NATO and defence and so on. But I'll come back to that in the talk. While I was starting to think, oh shit, it's Monday quite soon, the other day, I was actually looking for a t-shirt, a clean t-shirt to wear, and I found my Stop the War one, which has got a list of all the United States military interventions since 1945 on the back, and I've forgotten exactly how many there are, but it's well over 20. And I just thought, actually, something, the trick we've probably missed on the left is actually you could do a very similar one for Britain as well, actually. And I mean, if you're 21 right now, in your lifetime, you'll have seen 8 wars that the British state has been involved in. And actually, if you reflect on that, it's not that that's special either, actually. I mean, maybe slightly higher frequency over that period than in the period since 1945, but not much, actually. I started counting, and I ran out it's really quite a lot. If anybody wants to think about it during the meeting, you have a prize yeah. Okay, so it's not far different from what the US has been involved in. And many of them, of course, have been as kind of backers up or supporters of the United States. So why is that? And I suppose one of the things that lies in the background of this, and I'm sure many people here will be familiar with it, is that, I mean, Britain is a state that has gone over the last 50 or 60 years from being one of the preeminent imperial powers in the world to being certainly not that anymore, but has attempted to kind of keep elements of that role, and very often by tying itself to the kind of coattails of what, for much of that period has been the preeminent imperial power, which is the United States. And to talk in great detail about that would take far longer than I think I should devote to that just now. But one of the things that seems to me to be key about that relationship, and key about probably the last 15 or 20 years, is the role that the NATO alliance plays in that. And I want to just develop that a little bit, because I think it's quite important for the politics of the next 12 months and beyond. And for me, it's the way in which British imperialism has actually shaped the kind of the world we live in, and specifically what it's like to live in Scotland, is actually one of the key reasons why I'll be voting yes in the referendum next year. It's not the only reason, but in analysing that, I think it's important to see why NATO is so important. So just a very brief background to that. I mean, NATO's been around since 1949, and it's very much a creation of the Cold War. And arguably it had 3 main objectives, I think. First was part of a strategy to kind of encircle the USSR. But it wasn't just about that. It was actually a strategy that involved bringing Western countries, and particularly European countries, under a kind of US control as far as military and foreign and strategic policy went. And in a sense, it ensured United States dominance over Europe and during that period. And while it claimed all kinds of things, I mean, it claimed to be, in the rhetoric of the Cold War, it claimed to be about democracy and freedom. What it actually was incredibly anti-democratic and involved, you know, a pretty aggressive and often lethally aggressive set of policies. And the third thing it did, which is often less remarked but is actually quite important, it also involved a whole lot of kind of clandestine operations that were often directed against left-wing governments or against left-wing organisations in European countries, and you know, making preparations for acting against any move to the left in any parts of what it saw as its kind of sphere of influence. And that wasn't just about military policy, of course, because, I mean, there's a nice quote by somebody who I couldn't find the source from, but I think is an ex-US Foreign Secretary, and it says, Pax Americana came with an implicit price tag to nations that accepted the US security umbrella. And the language here is quite interesting, really. But so, an implicit price tag. If a country depended on the United States for security protection, it dealt with the United States on trade and commercial matters. So this, you know, isn't just about the military, it's about the economy as well. And more than that, I think, NATO was a really key part of a US plan to kind of reorganise the world economy in their interest. It was about opening up the world to US business and to tie the countries that were part of NATO into that kind of political hegemony that the United States had. And there was a slogan that that NATO used when they met in 1999 to redefine the borders of where they operated, because initially it was kind of what it said on the tin. It was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. 1999, when NATO met, they explicitly redesigned their remit to cover the whole of Europe and the whole of Asia. Okay, so their zone of operations is now not the North Atlantic, and it's clear when you see what, unless you redefine where Afghanistan is, it's quite clear that's not what they've been doing since 1999. They've been engaging much more widely. But the slogan that they coined at that meeting was out of area or out of business, right? And again, I think that was deliberately meant to be double-edged. It wasn't simply about, they needed a role that wasn't simply about Europe. They actually understood that in terms of the strategic interest of the US economy as well as the US military. And, of recent times, that out-of-area thing you've seen in terms of, since 2003, NATO took control of the operations in Afghanistan. It was the command umbrella for the bombing campaign in Libya. And actually, the one thing that stayed constant since 1949 is that the explicit policy of the NATO alliance is that it's pro-nuclear, but more than that, it's not just pro-nuclear, its policy is first strike pro-nuclear. So they envisage a situation where the NATO alliance would use nuclear weapons first in any conflict. And okay, so I painted that picture for a reason, because it seems to me that in a discussion about what the future of Scotland looks like, then understanding what the implications of being part of NATO or being not part of NATO mean is actually really critical to that. And I certainly, I and other members of Stop the War with Trident Ploughshares and C&D and others worked very hard up until the spring in bringing together kind of the first of all No to NATO coalition and then organising the Scrap Trident demonstration in the spring. And in many respects it was reasonably successful, it was a good demonstration and so on, but my sense is that we failed there, because actually what we did was we united the people who think you should scrap Trident, and that's a huge majority of people in Scotland. What we didn't do was break through, as we had hoped we would, to have more of a debate about NATO. And it's quite clear that within SNP policy there is that, what I would consider to be a disjuncture between saying, yes, we're going to scrap Trident, but actually we're going to be members of NATO. Because, as I said, I mean, by and large, NATO is not an issue that people in the street are talking about all the time. But I think for the debate about independence, it's actually really critical, because if you buy into NATO, you buy into all of this other stuff as well. And that seems to me to matter quite a lot. And it's not just that that's a kind of hypothetical or theoretical problem for the future. I mean, there are other countries that have actually, that are part of NATO, that have tried to have non-nuclear policies. Germany, Belgium, Netherlands are case in point. And they've tried to get a policy of saying they don't want US nuclear weapons on their soil, and they failed. Those weapons are still on their soil. And it's, in the white paper, it explicitly says, you know, that an independent Scotland would allow ships or presumably aircraft from NATO countries to come. They wouldn't disclose this, but actually that would be happening. So I think there's an issue here, and it's part about the positive message that I think that there should be about independence. That I think actually not grappling with that issue of NATO not making it part of the debate is actually something that can undermine the sense that we're actually arguing for change. Because basically, if you're part of NATO, you're tied into a nuclear club. That's the truth. I mean, there isn't any kind of soft option being a member of NATO. You either are or you're not. So that's one thing I don't want to throw into the discussion, because I know there are different views about that, and I think it's important to discuss it.
There's an inherent contradiction in the SNP paper, in that they're saying we're going to get rid of Triton, but we're going to remain part of NATO, and that doesn't compute. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Okay, but I'd be interested to see what other people think about that. Next year is going to be a really interesting and important year in a whole range of different ways, not least obviously because of the referendum, but actually a number of other things are happening, and I just want to finish by mentioning them, because I think that in terms of the discussion, the debate that goes on, I think they will be quite key to that debate, and they set a context for the debate that takes place. First is actually the NATO conference, which happens on I'm not sure, I think it is an annual basis, will be in South Wales next year. Now, it's not obviously in Scotland, but it's not so far away. And it's quite interesting, actually, that sometimes NATO conferences happen kind of under the radar to some extent. This time, the Westminster government is talking about it. I mean, they're talking about it as it's going to be a huge boost for tourism in Wales, for example, is one of the statements I've seen. You can just see people flocking for their late summer holidays to take in the NATO conference. I'm sure there's anybody else here that was there with me, but I went to the NATO conference in Strasbourg in, when was it, in 2007, something. Very interesting experience. I mean, trying to get through the razor wire, which completely surrounded Strasbourg, was quite a struggle. We had 2 busloads of people from Scotland there, and we ended up being essentially kind of strip searched. Someone was beaten up by the French riot police. It was really tough going, and that was your friendly local North Atlantic Treaty Organisation in town, and that was what it was like. So it will. I think the Westminster government will use it to raise the stakes about issues around the military and about nuclear weapons actually next year, and also about their continuing role in making so-called humanitarian interventions around the world, because NATO has become the means by which those operations take place. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, of course, if that wasn't enough, next year is the 100th anniversary of the First World War. And again, you're seeing Cameron in particular, but backed up from other of the main political parties as well, actually talking about a celebration of 1914. Sometimes they choose their words more carefully than that, but they've certainly talked about it in those terms. And they're putting 50 or 60 million pounds into a whole range of events that will be to mark those 100 years. And despite the fact that some of the people that they've pulled into that talk about, well, yes, we're going to be remembering the horror of the First World War, the dominant message that's coming through is a jingoistic one that's about British nationalism, it's about glorifying war, and it's about, almost we would do this again. Okay, more than 20 million people dying in the trenches in France. There's a whole set of narratives about the First World War that you can absolutely guarantee that if they're not made by an opposition to that narrative that's coming from the Westminster government, then they won't get heard at all. So, for example, first of all, there's this sheer horror of it. There's the nature of the policies that led to those millions of mainly young men to their death. But actually, there's also who was fighting there. There was a period in the First World War when more than half of the troops in France were actually from the Indian subcontinent. Do you see that in the documentaries? No, I don't think you do. Okay, I mean, they were the people who were fighting and dying for British imperialism between 1914 and 1918. So I think it's really important that that's not taken passively. This is quite a big deal, actually. I mean, it's not the kind of thing, sometimes on the left we kind of feel like if we've had a meeting or done something, we've kind of done our bit. But actually, if we're going to do something that people really notice on this, there needs to be needs to be a grassroots thing, and people need to be doing things in every town and city and village in Scotland, I think, that actually counts as this. And certainly, from Stop the War's point of view, we've initiated a campaign which we're calling No Glory in War. And in Scotland, we've got a whole number of things underway that we hope to do, but we're absolutely sure that we can't do that all by ourselves. I mean, it's the kind of thing that needs lots of different organisations to be doing things. Jimmy Reid Foundation has actually been working really well in the west of Scotland on proposing a series of events there. But the kinds of things we're thinking of doing is we're hoping to, we've got the artist Muhammad Ali with the possibility of doing a massive artwork on a prominent wall in Edinburgh if we can do it. Okay, now there's issues with that, finding the right wall, and then if we can find the right wall, actually getting the money together to do it properly. But we're also thinking of doing poetry events, producing because clearly Edinburgh's got that resonance of the people like Wilfred Owen and Sigrid Sassoon, who were in military mental hospitals in Craiglocker, and actually we're thinking of producing a poetry booklet, getting local poets involved, probably doing some kind of big poetry event, music events, a whole range of different things. Now, but it seems to me it's the kind of thing that requires kind of 100,000 flowers blooming really to really make a difference. And as I said, it matters because one of the things which, even if other things are more generalised, the other thing that's happening, of course, is the Commonwealth Games, and Cameron has said that one of the events, the first event which all of the Commonwealth Prime Ministers will be brought to, is an event to commemorate the First World War. Okay, so deliberately using that event in terms to back up this initiative. So, okay, I'll put that into the mix in terms of discussion as well, because I think there's scope for lots of ideas about things to do. Right, finally, just to conclude then, I mean, I just want to come back to the debate on NATO, because I think that is really important. And there are divisions on the left over that, I think, which need debating out. Certainly campaign for nuclear disarmament, Trident Ploughshares, Stop the War are very strongly anti-NATO and have been trying to make the running in terms of bringing those ideas out. Other organisations like Scotland's for Peace have actually had a strong position on scrapping Trident, but have not had a position on NATO, for example. And I think it's not a matter of actually kind of shouting at people if they've got the wrong position. I think it's a matter of actually developing a debate that doesn't simply confine itself to the adherents of those organisations and the people close to them, but needs to go out further than that into the much wider public, because when you speak to people, there's the issue around Trident is obviously one that people are very aware of. The issues around actually effectively getting rid of Trident and the role that NATO would have in impeding that are less well known, so that they do need raising. So I'll stop there and see what people have to say.
Okay, thanks very much, Pete. People want to raise their hands if they want to make a contribution. I'll call them. Donnie?
Yeah, I think it's really important.